Worshipful. Thank you, Worshipful Peter, and thanks again, everybody, for being here tonight. I want to actually personally thank very worshipful Allan Casalou for accepting the invitation. He is definitely one of our great minds in our organization. He has served the Grand Lodge staff for over 20 years professionally and as a historian. He's a past master of Kalani's Fellowship Lodge, and he is our Grand Secretary. Very worshipful, Allan Casalou.
Thank you very much. Everyone. I really appreciate the invitation to be here. Your lodge Burbank Lodge has been doing these educational events for years now. And I think this is probably my 4th visit, if I'm remembering that correctly. And I enjoy everyone just like I've enjoyed tonight already. And one of the things I enjoyed tonight was meeting all of the new members. How many of you are entered apprentice or fellowcraft Mason? Yeah, quite a few. And that's great. Welcome to the fraternity. If you're a member of Burbank Lodge, you chose a really good one. If it was another lodge, I'm sure it's good too. But it's nice to see so many new members here. Jairo and your master introduced me as the Grand Secretary, so I thought I would just say something about that for a minute in case you're not sure what that is. So a lodge, right, like Burbank Lodge, has officers. You have a master, right, and you have a secretary, and their job, other officers, and their job is to run the lodge. Well, we have a Grand Lodge, which is our statewide organization that all of our members are a part of. And we have a master and a secretary too, but because it's called the Grand Lodge, it's the Grand Master and the Grand Secretary. And so I've been our Grand Secretary now. I'm in my 16th term, so it's been over 16 years. And as Jairo said, I've worked at our Grand Lodge office, which is technically headquartered in San Francisco. I say technically these days, why? A lot of people are working remotely. It's me and just a few other people in San Francisco these days. But my job every day is not to travel around and make speeches to lodges. I enjoy that. That's what I do for fun. But my job is to run the business of the fraternity. There's a lot going on every day. Whether it's finances or insurance or investments or real estate, just think about all the things that would be involved in an organization. As long as ours, I work on that all day long. This is the type of stuff I really love to do. So I love invitations like this. And what I'm sharing with you tonight is a portion of a research paper, let's just call it that I have been working on for 9 years. I started this project in 2014. I presented this for the first time in 2014, and I have been working on it all these years. And so I really love the opportunity. What you're going to see tonight is what I call the presentation version. It's a shortened version of the work that I've done. And it's all about one of our brothers, a man by the name of Earl Warren, who was a great figure of the 20th century. This is not a test, and it doesn't matter whether you know the answer or not. As a matter of fact, I like it when people say, no, I've never heard of Earl Warren, because I get to introduce Earl Warren to you, right? So just tell me, how many of you in the room, when I say Earl Warren, raise your hand if you know who I'm talking about. All right. What do you know?
Chief Justice.
Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, right?
Past Grand Master.
Past Grand Master of our Grand Lodge, former Governor of California. All that's true. What else?
There's a lot of stadiums named after him,
Yeah.
areas named after
Fairgrounds in Santa
He
Barbara.
was, right. He was a very popular person. He was an elected official. He was the district attorney of Alameda County, which is a large county just east of San Francisco in the Bay Area. Oakland is the center of Alameda County. So he was the elected district attorney. He was elected Attorney General of the state of California, and twice he was elected Governor of California, and he made history. They had a primary system, an primary election system like we have now, with 2 different parties, He's the only person in history in California to win the nomination of both political parties. Right? He was a consensus builder. He was very popular with people. He ran for president, but he also ran for vice president with a candidate by the last name of Dewey. Does that make any sense? So he came this close to being vice president. Because who did Dewey run against? Truman.
Oh my God, that's true.
And it was so close that what did the newspapers say the day after election?
That Dewey won.
Dewey defeats Truman was the headline. You think elections are crazy now. That election was crazy, but Earl Warren was that close. He was going to run for president. He did. He was in the presidential primary against a fellow by the name of Dwight Eisenhower. Dwight Eisenhower's running mate,
Richard
a
Nixon.
Californian, Richard Nixon, told Eisenhower, "This is not good. Earl Warren's going to beat you. He's really popular." So they made a deal. Nixon brokered a deal with Earl Warren and Dwight Eisenhower. They were at the Republican National Convention. He was a Republican, but again, Earl Warren was, but again, somebody who appealed to people of all political ideas. And, you know, there was politics. And they went to the back room, and at the end of that meeting, they said, if you give us your delegates, this is Eisenhower and Nixon saying, if you give us your delegates, Eisenhower will give you the first appointment available to the Supreme Court. Earl Warren took the deal. Little did Eisenhower know that soon after he was inaugurated, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court would die, creating a vacancy in the Chief Justice position. He tried to renege in his deal with Earl Warren, but Earl Warren made him be true to his word, and Earl Warren became the Chief Justice of the United States. I tell you all of this because I'm leaving all of this out of what I'm talking about tonight. But I wanted to give you some background into this person who we're talking about. All of you know who John Kennedy was. You know he was assassinated in 1963. There was a committee put together to investigate the assassination of President John Kennedy. What was the name of that commission? The Warren Commission, because Earl Warren was the leader of the commission. Earl Warren was personal friends with the Kennedys, and Robert Kennedy, Jackie Kennedy, said the only person we could trust to do this is Earl Warren. He turned them down 3 times, and in the end, agreed to lead that commission, and it wore him out. It wore him out, and it wasn't long after his work was done in that commission that he retired from the Supreme Court. But a fascinating man, a lot to know. I'm going to tell you a little bit tonight about him as a Mason. This is a story that's not told very often. But more than that, who Earl Warren is to me as a Mason is an example of an important Masonic idea. Everything we do in Masonry in this room together, think about all the wonderful things you've done together in this room. Think about the things you've learned, the people you've met, the experiences you've had. In Masonry, we say, you know, if it all stays in this room, it's meaningless. Where the real meaning comes is when we take the ideas, the experiences that we have in this room, and we take them out to the rest of the world. And we live a life that demonstrates these principles that we talk about. This is why Earl Warren is important to me, because he is a great example of somebody who was able to do that. And what he did is not easy. This idea of trying to figure out the keys to life and then going out and actually using them is a lot harder than it sounds, right? But it's what we all work at. And that's why this presentation is important to me. That's why I think it's a good idea to take some time tonight and talk about, I think, one of the most influential people of the 20th century who happened to be a Mason, and that was Earl Warren. Earl Warren wore many badges in his life, badges, ranging from the uniform he wore. Well, this was just working before dinner. Oh, no. I don't know. What did we do?
I timed out.
There we go. Ranging from the uniform he wore as a first lieutenant in the United States Army, to the badge he wore as the district attorney of Alameda County, to the apron he wore as a Mason, and to the robe he wore as Chief Justice of the United States. Each of these badges carried a certain authority with it, certain responsibilities, and certain traditions. Tonight, I'm going to focus on two of Earl Warren's badges: the white Masonic apron and the black judicial robe. The white apron is familiar to all of us as Masons. Of course, it originated from the aprons worn by stoneworking Freemasons. And to us as Masons, it is what? It's the emblem of innocence and the badge of a Mason. There really is little information about the origin of the black judicial robe. Oh dear. Yes. Of the black judicial robe. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, again, a justice from the 20th century, wrote in a 2013 Smithsonian magazine article, this is what she wrote. It's surprising to me how little we know about where this plain black judicial robe comes from. She notes that in the earliest days of our court system, the black robe was common, but it was not universal. She writes, it is believed that by 1801, when John Marshall became the Chief Justice, the justices were in the habit of wearing black. Today, every federal and state judge in the country wears a very similar black robe. To Justice O'Connor, the robe is a symbol of their common responsibility to the Constitution. She is drawn to the customs, the ritual, if you will, that accompanies the black robe. Here's further what she said. My fondest thoughts of my robe have to do with the tradition at the Supreme Court for putting it on during argument days. A buzzer sounds about 5 minutes before argument begins. The justices go to a robing room, the court's version of a locker room. Each justice has a locker. Attendants help the justices fasten their robes. Then justices, without fail, engage in a wonderful custom. Each justice shakes the hand of every other justice before walking in to the courtroom. An important reminder that despite the justices' occasional differences in opinion, the court is a place of collegiality and common purpose. I wonder if the justices who were also Masons see the same similarity that I do to the custom and tradition of putting on the Masonic apron. In the moments before a lodge is opened, Masons gather in an anteroom just outside the lodge room and put on their aprons. They make their way to a seat in the lodge, stopping or being stopped to shake hands and greet their brothers. Brothers from all walks of life, all religions, all social backgrounds, who, despite the distinctions created by the outside world, are equal, or on the level, as we say, in the lodge room. The apron is a leveling symbol that unites Masons and makes a lodge a place of harmony and common purpose. Whether Chief Justice Earl Warren ever thought about this similarity, I may never know. But he has recorded enough of his own voice in history that I am comfortable saying he wore both the white Masonic apron and the black judicial robe with great pride and with an appropriate reverence for their symbolism. Now, what you see up here are the minutes of a lodge in Oakland showing that Earl Warren was elected, you see the fourth name on that list, was elected to membership. Earl Warren received his Masonic apron over 100 years ago, on October 11th, 1919, when he was initiated and entered apprentice Mason, just like many of you, in Sequoia Lodge number 349 in Oakland. Warren applied to receive the degrees of Masonry, just like all of you did, a month earlier, on September 2nd, 1919, and he was elected to membership on October 7th. Actually, this was the second time Warren petitioned the lodge. He submitted his first application 3 years earlier, in October of 1916. But on that occasion, his application was rejected. The election of an applicant to receive the degrees of Masonry, as you know, requires a unanimous vote of the lodge. Having been rejected, or blackballed, as it's sometimes called, at least one member of Sequoia Lodge was not ready to admit Earl Warren into Freemasonry in 1960. I don't know the reason for his rejection. That's confidential and left up to the members. But it's clear that whatever the reason was, it was resolved by 1919, when Earl Warren joined the ranks of Freemasonry and became a notable part of the history of our fraternity. Earl Warren was an engaged, enthusiastic, and dedicated Freemason. I point this out because there are other Masons who are also famous in history, but who were not very involved as a Mason, or maybe only in a passive way. This was not the case with Earl Warren. He quickly advanced through the degrees of Masonry. He received his second degree on October 16, 1919, and his third degree 2 weeks later, on November 1st, 1919. This tells me he had a good memory. He was a quick study, and he had a substantial desire to progress through the degrees of Masonry. There's a good deal of work that a candidate for the degrees has to memorize. Right? Warren would not have been able to advance as quickly as he did without dedicating several hours every day to the study of this work. Warren was an officer of the lodge for 7 years, serving as master in 1928. That's his signature on the bottom of the minutes of the lodge, his first meeting of January 3rd, 1928. The same year, he was elected president of the Masters and Past Masters Association of Alameda County, which demonstrates that the fraternity's leaders in that county held him in high esteem. He was involved in the concordant bodies of Freemasonry, and he took leadership positions there. I was just talking about Ami's shrine with somebody at dinner. He was potentate of Omni Shrine in 1933 and Venerable Master of Oakland Scottish Rite in 1945. If you're aware of his political history, this means he was Venerable Master of the Scottish Rite when he was Governor of the state of California. He served Grand Lodge on a number of committees and was elected Grand Master of Masons in 1935, serving through October of 1936. And though he went on to positions of great influence in state and federal government, Earl Warren continued his relationship with his lodge, often serving as the installing officer for the annual installation of officers, even when he was governor. I've never met Earl Warren, but because of our Masonic ties, I do feel like I understand him. We lived in different times, and we led very different lives. But we're both Masons, and I find the bonds of fraternity very close between the two of us. As I read about his life, and having had the opportunity to read some of his own words as Grand Master of Masons in California and as Chief Justice, I have observed the core principles of Freemasonry embodied in the way he lived his life, the way he acted, and the judgment he exercised on the Supreme Court and elsewhere. I want to share a few of these observations with you. I do not intend to establish a cause and effect relationship between his membership and leadership in Freemasonry and his history-making actions on the Supreme Court. Nor will I attempt any historical or legal analysis of his work. I'm sure you're relieved by that. I simply want to point out what I recognize as Masonic principles reflected in his work. Why is this important to me? I talked about this before. Why would it be important to any Mason? Because as Masons, we are taught and we each personally strive to practice the principles of Masonry in our daily lives, to find ways to translate these well-written words in the ritual into intentional and obvious behaviors in our lives. This is not an easy thing to do, but when we see that a man such as Warren was able to accomplish it, we are inspired to continue our efforts to improve ourselves and to do good for others. I want to focus now on a period of time in Warren's Masonic membership between 1919 and 1929, a 10-year period. During these 10 years, Warren went to lodge almost every Tuesday night. How do you think I know that?
Minutes.
And the Tyler's Register. I went through the Tyler's Register of his lodge. He rarely missed a meeting in that 10-year period. He served in nearly every office in the lodge. This means he memorized not only his proficiencies as a candidate, but a significant portion of the ritual. Sequoia Lodge, his lodge, received hundreds of applications for membership in that 10-year period. In fact, they read between 5 and 15 applications at every meeting. The lodge was very busy conferring degrees. And the meeting minutes and the Tyler's Registers of Sequoia Lodge reveal that Warren himself performed these degrees during that 10-year period hundreds of times. He memorized it and delivered it over and over again. The teachings of Freemasonry, when he was between the ages of 28 and 38, likely very formative years in his adult life. Just like Warren and just like many of you in this room, I have also memorized much of that same ritual over the last 32 years. I have performed it more than 100 times myself. I find this work and the repetition of the work very useful. especially during times of challenge or crisis. I tap into this ritual. I recite the words to myself, and I'm caused to remember the important principles they imply. It helps me gain perspective. It clears my mind. It gives me an idea of what is right and what is important. In reflecting back on his most active days in Sequoia Lodge, Earl Warren wrote this letter to the lodge master, Owen Anchor, on October 11, 1952, from the governor's office in Sacramento. He writes, "My own membership in Sequoia has given me enriching experiences. The lessons I learned in the 3 degrees of the craft have guided me through many difficult situations, and I have always been sustained by the fraternal affection of our brother." You begin to see how I have begun to relate so well with Earl Warren, even though I didn't know him. Many of the lessons of our craft are found in the several passages of the ritual which help shape our thinking and guide our actions. Here are just a few passages from our Masonic ceremonies that particularly resonate with me as being consistent with Earl Warren's most important work. The first passage describes one of the 3 principal tenets of Freemasonry, brotherly love. By the exercise of brotherly love, we are taught to regard the whole human species as one family, the high and the low, the rich and the poor, who as created by one almighty parent and as inhabitants of the same planet are to aid, support, and protect each other. That sounds familiar to you all, right? This is the description of one of the working tools of the 2nd degree, which is also used in the installation ceremony. The level, my brother, demonstrates that we are all descended from the same stock, that we partake from the same nature, and we share the same hope. And that although distinctions among men are necessary to preserve subordination, yet no eminence of station should make us forget that we are brothers. For he who is placed on the lowest spoke of fortune's wheel is entitled to our regard. And this last passage describes one of Freemasonry's 4 cardinal virtues: justice. Justice is that standard or boundary of right which enables us to render unto every man his just due without distinction. These represent just a small sample of the ritual that Warren studied, memorized, and conveyed to others in his lodge. These principles are obvious to me in his life and work: total equality and respect for everyone, regardless of one's station in life, fairness and concern for those less capable or less fortunate. As Masons, we believe that equality is achieved when all people have access to the same information and have the same opportunity to learn and grow and make a difference as everyone else. We believe that we have an obligation to level the playing field by elevating everyone to the same plane. I see these ideas come alive time and again in Earl Warren's life and work. Let me provide a few examples from the written work of the Chief Justice in 3 of his well-known, or let's say landmark cases. Miranda versus Arizona. In 1966, the Supreme Court considered whether it was necessary to embed certain protections in the process of what they call custodial interrogations. You're in custody of the police and they're interrogating you, right? In order to ensure that the citizen's Fifth Amendment right to avoid self-incrimination was properly preserved. As we know, the court decided that, in fact, specific notice must be given to those who are taken into custody. They have the right to remain silent, and they have the right to legal counsel. The court ordered that those in custody must be warned that anything they say can be used against them in a trial, and that counsel will be provided to them at no cost if they cannot otherwise afford counsel. This notice is now known as the Miranda warning. We've all heard it. Maybe not in actual custody. But we've all heard it, right? You have the right to remain silent, and so on. That came about because of Earl Warren and this decision. Some have made the observation that this and similar decisions by the Warren Court reflect the Chief Justice's negative view of law enforcement, a view that he acquired after a long tenure as the District Attorney of Alameda County and the Attorney General of the state of California. There might be some merit to this observation. I mean, there's no doubt that in this career, Earl Warren saw some of the best and some of the worst law enforcement practices. There's also plenty written into this decision to support the fact that Warren had a vast knowledge of interrogation practices. But as a Mason, I see other principles in this decision. Do you? I see principles of fairness, of justice, of concern for mankind, especially those in need or at a disadvantage. In reading his decision, I'm caused to remember our Masonic obligation to give a man due and timely notice if he is in danger of injury to his person or good name. I notice an effort to bring all the people to the same plane by giving them all the same information. I notice a search for that boundary of right that will render unto every man his just due without distinction. In the decision, and Warren wrote this decision, he says, the need for counsel in order to protect the Fifth Amendment privilege exists for the indigent as well as for the affluent. In fact, were we to limit the constitutional rights to those who could retain an attorney, our decision today would be of little significance. The cases before us, as well as the vast majority of confession cases which we have dealt with in the past, involve those unable to retain counsel. While authorities are not required to relieve the accused of poverty, they have an obligation not to take advantage of indigence in the administration of justice. In this decision, I observe a man who regarded the whole human species as one family, the high and the low, the rich and the poor, who are to aid, support, and protect each other. Hernandez versus Texas. This case involved the systematic expulsion of people of Mexican descent from serving as jurors, although there were such people fully qualified to serve in Jackson County, Texas, where Pete Hernandez stood trial for murder. The Supreme Court reversed the decision of the lower court and declared that the Constitution entitled Hernandez and all defendants the right to be indicted and tried by juries selected from among all qualified persons, regardless of their national origin and descent. Again, Warren wrote the opinion of the court. In it, he expressed the idea that prejudice is in constant motion, that it is subject to change, that one prejudice could be cured, but another might arise. This is what he wrote. Throughout our history, differences in race and color have defined easily identifiable groups, which at times have required the aid of the courts in securing equal treatment under the law. But community prejudices are not static, and from time to time, other differences from the community norm may define other groups which will need the same protection. When the existence of a distinct class is demonstrated, and it is further shown that the laws as written or applied single out that class for different treatment, not based on some reasonable classification, the guarantees of the Constitution have been violated. Warren helps me in this writing understand that prejudice won't end with a war, with a piece of legislation, with a treaty. The human existence is constantly evolving, and we must be aware that prejudice will also evolve. Also, even if we work to level the playing field today, tomorrow may require us to level it again. Perhaps this is why, as Masons, we say we must be ever willing to stretch forth a helping hand to raise those who have fallen. Perhaps this is why Masons judge the internal and not the external qualities of people. Masons are taught that the only meaningful distinction among mankind is whether one intends to do good or not. The installation ceremony reminds us that the time will come, and the wisest know not how soon, when all distinction, save that of goodness, shall cease, and death, the mighty leveler of human greatness, reduce us to that same state. As Masons, we believe that the desire to do good is what unites us, and in the end, it's all that matters. Now, the importance of public education was a popular topic inside Masonic lodges from the time Earl Warren was initiated a Mason to the time he served as Grand Master. In 1920, just months after Warren became a Freemason, Grand Master Charles Adams created Public Schools Week. That's Charles Adams there on the right, and you see his proclamation creating the first Public Schools Week observance. He required all lodges, this is Charles Adams, in California, to become aware of the needs of the public schools in their community and to do whatever they could to address those needs. Public Schools Week has been observed by Freemasons in California every year since 1920. Today it is known as Public Schools Month, and this year we celebrate the 103rd anniversary of this important observance. Year after year, Warren and his brothers were caused to be informed about the state of public schools in Oakland, and they were directed to promote the school's best interest in their community. In 1928, as master of the lodge, Warren was responsible to see that Sequoia Lodge observed Public Schools Week. He took this obligation seriously. Warren wrote a short article in each month's trestle board, and I happen to have this bound book in my office, and this bound book are the 12 trestle boards of Sequoia Lodge when Earl Warren was master. In the April 1928 issue of the Trestle Board, Warren wrote about their upcoming public schools event. And this is what he wrote. Every Mason should have some intimate knowledge of the organization and functions of our public schools. The Honorable Alexander F. Herron, Director of Finances of California, is at the present time perhaps more familiar with such matters than any other man in the state. He will talk to us on the reorganization of the State Department of Education. The observance of Public Schools Week has become an established Masonic institution, and it is hoped that the Brothers of Sequoia Lodge will lend their presence in order to make our meeting worthy of the cause. He was championing this idea of Public Schools Week. It was important to Warren that Public Schools Week address the real issues facing children in school. And that it not be simply a social activity of the lodge. When he was Grand Master in 1936, he was responsible for the statewide observance of Public Schools Week. This observance was important enough to Warren that in his 1936 Grand Master's address to the address to the Grand Lodge, he wrote this: I note with interest that there was widespread observance of our 17th annual Public Schools Week, and that another jurisdiction, Georgia, initiated a similar observance this year. It is also gratifying to note that as time passes, Public Schools Week is becoming more of a civic affair than formally, and that greater emphasis is now being placed upon presenting to the general public a real picture of the activities and school life of children, rather than upon mere entertainment. Earl Warren took these issues of public schools very seriously. In an interesting turn of events, which I explained in the intro, Warren was appointed Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court in October 1953, just as the Supreme Court was hearing arguments in the case known as Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka et al. In Brown, Warren and the court considered the question of whether segregation of children in public schools solely on the basis of race, even though the physical facilities and other tangible factors may be equal, deprive children of the minority group of equal education opportunities. We know the court believed it did. In a unanimous decision, the court ruled that segregated educational facilities are inherently unequal and deprive the minority students of equal protection under the law. Warren again wrote the opinion of the court, and he described the drafting process this way: I assigned myself to write the decision, for it seemed to me that something so important ought to issue over the name of the Chief Justice of the United States. In drafting it, I sought to use low-key, unemotional language, and I kept it short enough so that it could be published in full in every newspaper in the country. I kept the text secret. It was locked in my safe until I read it from the bench. This is not the complete decision, so don't worry, but listen to these words written by the Chief Justice in the Brown decision describing his view of education. Today, education is perhaps the most important function of the state and local governments. Compulsory school attendance laws and the great expenditures for education both demonstrate our recognition of the importance of education to a democratic society. It is required in the performance of our most basic public responsibilities, even service in the armed forces. It is the very foundation of good citizenship. Today, it is a principal instrument in awakening the child to cultural values, in preparing him for later professional training, and in helping him to adjust normally to his environment. In these days, it is doubtful that any child may reasonably be expected to succeed if he is denied the opportunity of an education. Such opportunity, where the state has undertaken to provide it, is a right, which must be made available to all on equal terms. I believe these words represented Earl Warren's personal thoughts about education. Why do I believe this? First, because his handwritten draft of the opinion, which is up here, is available for view, and it's very close to the final version. So we know he wrote it himself. And I point that out because some of his critics say he didn't write many of his opinions, but it's clear that he wrote this one. And secondly, because these thoughts in the Brown opinion are almost identical to the thoughts Grand Master Warren shared with his brother Masons during his address to the 1936 annual communication. In this report, he did not feel the same need to be low-key or unemotional. Here is what Earl Warren wrote about public education when he was Grand Master of Masons in California 18 years before the Brown decision. The more I see life, the more firmly I am convinced that the hope of the future lies in the education of youth. Not of some children, but of all children. Not according to so-called classes of society, but according to wisely conceived and efficiently executed plans that will make available to every child, regardless of station in life, an equal opportunity to study, learn, and progress upon their own merits. In this complicated and ever-changing world, this best can be done, indeed it can only be done, by a system of free public education. It is for this reason that the Grand Lodge of California, ever striving as it does to replace darkness with light, is so vitally interested in the public schools in our state. One of the greatest leavening influences in society today is the public schools. It does more to break down distinctions between social and economic groups and to eliminate class consciousness than any other man-made institution. It provides the strongest proof to the world that he that is on the lowest spoke of fortune's wheel is entitled to our regard. By destroying prejudice and planting reason in its place, it prepares the foundation of a liberty-loving people, the greatest blessing this or any other nation ever had. That's what Earl Warren wrote about public education in 1936. And it seems to me that he was quite prepared for the Brown decision when he joined the court in 1953. He spent decades considering the implications of equality in public education. Indeed, as Grand Master Warren advocated in 1936, the Brown decision of 1954 planted reason in place of prejudice and laid the foundation for equality in school environments. There was a New York Times obituarist named Alden Whitman, that's him on the right. He wrote the 1974 obituary of the Chief Justice, and this is what he said. From the Brown decision flowed a score or more holdings by the court and by inferior courts that collectively struck down racial inequalities in most areas of public life. As a result, parks, swimming pools, bus terminals, and housing were desegregated. Whitman said, among other things, the Warren Court enunciated the one-man, one-vote rule, underscored the right of a jury trial, said that wages could not be garnished without warning or a hearing, and made most of the Bill of Rights binding on the states. Earl Warren had many titles in his life. He served many different terms of office. One of his longest tenures was his 55 years as a Freemason. Edward Sims was one of my predecessors as Grand Secretary, and he was a past Grand Master of our Grand Lodge. was interviewed in 1970 about his relationship with Earl Warren shortly after the Chief Justice retired from the Supreme Court. In the interview, Sims indicates that Warren's interest in Freemasonry was still strong in 1970. He said, since he resigned as Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Warren told me that the teachings of Masonry have been an important influence in his life throughout his entire legal career. I usually see Earl Warren in Washington every February. We have dinner together when I go there to Masonic conferences, and he seems hungry to find out what's going on in Masonry in California. He happens to be in California now. He called me up just last week and said, Ed, I'm coming over to have lunch with you. Can we just sit down and talk for a little while? So I know that he has maintained his interest all these years. Sims went on to reflect on Earl Warren as a Mason, and he said, I think one of the most outstanding features of Earl Warren's Masonic career was not only his devotion to Masonry and to the individual Mason, but the fact that he was willing to help anyone, and he seemed to seek out those that needed help the most. Earl Warren died on July 9th, 1974. His legacy is large. He means so much to so many different people. To me, as a Mason, he is an inspiration. His life is proof that we can, each one of us, practice out of the lodge those great moral duties which are inculcated in it. Thank you.
Tell me about his family. Did he have children?
Yes, he had a lot of children. I think they had 6 children. I have met and got to know his grandson, Jeffrey Earl Warren, who lives in Sonoma. The Warrens had a ranch in Sonoma. Even though they're from Oakland, they considered Sonoma their home. None of his kids went into politics. None of his sons became Masons.
Right.
Similar, typical story of the 20th century. Yeah.
That's because what he did, they couldn't fathom.
Sure. Yes. It was larger than life.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
To many people. But he was also a very common Mason. Common meaning he knew that when he walked in the lodge room, he wasn't the Attorney General, he wasn't the governor, he wasn't the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he was a brother. And he embodied that, and it's a good reminder to all of us that these words that we recite, memorize, they're actually supposed to be guiding our life, right? And how do we become that? How do we be sure that we are creating a level playing field by raising everybody up to the same level rather than pushing people down, right? It's Masonry, that's what it's about. It's about raising everybody up to the same level. Yeah.
How was the relationship between Earl Warren and Harry Truman, both of them being past Grand Masters, but politically on opposite sides?
Right, that's a very good question. So Harry Truman and Earl Warren, of course, were contemporaries. They were in politics at the same time. They were competing against one another in the election for President of the United States. They were close friends. And it's a very important thing to remember. Here you had, let's just say, a Democrat and a Republican. You had somebody from the Midwest and somebody from California. They had very different political ideas, but they were very good friends. And they trusted one another. We can trust people that think differently than us. We can be friends with people who think differently than us. This is not something of a bygone age, right? And that relationship, so the Earl Warren, Harry Truman relationship is a good example of that. As a matter of fact, Earl Warren got along much better with Harry Truman than he did with Dwight Eisenhower. And he and Dwight Eisenhower are of the same political party. Other questions?
Did he deal with Roosevelt at all?
I assume so, because again, they were somewhat contemporaries, but I've never read anything about it. You mean FDR?
Right.
Well, there is an FDR connection. He was Attorney General of California when FDR was president, and he worked very closely with the Roosevelt administration, particularly during the Second World War. Yeah. So they had to know each other.
No.
When he served on the bench, the Supreme Court bench, was he still highly active within Masonry?
No. So it's a very good question. When he was on the Supreme Court bench, was he active in Masonry? The answer is no. He was very active in Masonry until when he went on the court. When he went on the court, he didn't participate in anything else in his life. He believed that he had to be viewed as an objective person on the court, and he wasn't engaged in any civic organization, including Masonry. But you could tell by Ed Sims' interview, and that's why I included it, that he would get on the phone with the Grand Secretary and say, what's going on in Masonry in California, because he still cared, even though he wasn't active. Yeah. Big question. Other questions? Yes.
You don't know what religion he was, do you?
Yes. Yeah, I haven't. He was Christian, and it was a Protestant. It wasn't Catholic. He wasn't Episcopalian, but it was a Protestant religion. I can't remember what it is at this point. Yeah.
He looked like a Methodist.
Yeah, looked like a Methodist. Well, thank you for letting me share this. Next time you have the right to remain silent, you'll know that it was a Mason who was responsible for bringing us that protection. And when you come to Lodge and you hear these words about us coming from the same stock, partaking in the same nature, sharing the same hope for mankind, that those words will begin to internalize in you, like we know they internalized in Earl Warren, so that we can be people who not only believe these things, but demonstrate them to others in the way that we live our lives. I try to do it every day, and that's why I say it's not easy. I fail often at it. But I get up every morning, and people like Earl Warren give me the inspiration to say, I'm going to take another at-bat at this today, be the best person I can, learn to improve myself, use that improvement to help other people, right? And that's what is the inspiration behind our fraternity. So thank you so much for coming out tonight, for the invitation, and your warm hospitality and friendship. I really do appreciate it.
Please visit us more.
Oh,
We love to have you here with more lectures and even degrees when we have. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us for another exciting lecture. And please keep your eyes on the calendar. Worshipful Hyro is gonna arrange a few more until end of this year. And please join us. Thank you. Thank you.
Want to get a group picture of one?
Yes.
Everybody come up into the east. Let's get a picture.
One more photo.
I'll hold the camera.